What's going on, everybody? Happy Sunday. Welcome into the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Thanks so much for being here today. Before we get to our main topic, we had another little Aaron Rodgers tidbit on Saturday. I know a lot of you weren't necessarily huge fans of the Bob McGinn snippet. Well, I can give you one from a extremely reputable source, and that is one Tom Silverstein of the Green Bay Press Gazette and PackersNews.com. Tom, in his most recent article going over potential trades for Aaron Rodgers, said, quote, "At one point late last year, Green Bay Packers general manager Brian Gutekunst told an NFL colleague he was convinced it was time the organization move on from quarterback Aaron Rodgers and see what Jordan Love had in him." So that is the quote unquote that Tom Silverstein went with to start off his article. Again, check it out over at PackersNews.com. And this is just another of these little breadcrumbs that keep trickling in that seem to be more and more leaning towards a potential Aaron Rodgers trade in Green Bay going with Jordan Love. As I said yesterday, I have no idea, but we do seem to be seeing a lot of the information that's coming out seem to be trending in the same direction, and that is towards maybe Rodgers ending up with another team. What happens, we will still have to wait and see. Maybe the easiest reading / interpretation of this, if you are still on the we don't know anything sort of bandwagon, or that could mean a million different things sort of, I guess standpoint. The easiest interpretation of this could be, well, the Packers, remember, had lost a bunch of games in a row in the middle of the year, and they were basically one game away from being eliminated from playoff contention. And even Rodgers at the time basically mentioned yeah, if we don't win a game or two here, it's possible that Green Bay could start wanting to look at some of their younger players and maybe get Jordan some playing time. Remember, Rodgers had the thumb injury. So it's possible that Gutekunst was basically asked by an NFL colleague, hey, are you going to maybe go with Jordan Love if things don't turn around here? And Goody was probably yeah, we probably have to take a look at Jordan Love in that situation. So this could be mostly harmless as well. But as I've mentioned, we just keep getting kind of the same information rolling from a variety of different places that sort of lends itself to believe that this, again, could be heading in a direction where maybe Aaron's not back with Green Bay. Like I said, I'm still in the middle. I have no idea. Your guess is as good as mine. I don't have any more update than that, but that is the latest news from Tom Silverstein. Again, according to Tom, general manager Brian Gutekunst told an NFL colleague that he was convinced it was time for the organization to move on from quarterback Aaron Rodgers and see what Jordan Love had in him. So take that for what it's worth. That gets me to my main topic for today, and that is this Packers offseason so far. So let's start with the obvious here. It is February 19th as you are listening to this. It is extremely early. We just got done with the Super Bowl. Free agency hasn't started. We're just getting into draft season. We haven't even had the NFL Combine. The offseason as a whole is very much in its infancy. So when I say today that the Packers offseason so far has been pretty underwhelming, in my opinion, if we're being honest, that doesn't necessarily mean that the Packers offseason 3-4 months from now, when we look back at everything, will be underwhelming. They've got a top 15 pick in the draft. They've got some things that they can do to reshape this team. They've got a major decision to make at the quarterback position. Whatever they do at quarterback position may end up in them getting some additional assets in on this team. So there is a ton of time left. That being said, we are on February 19th. And there's been a lot of coaching changes. There's been some front office changes. There's been a lot of moving parts already this offseason. Really, the only real, I think, player moving part that's happened so far has been Derek Carr being released. Aaron Jones restructuring, probably another, one of those. But overall, from a player standpoint, there hasn't been a ton of movement. But a lot of coaches going in a lot of different directions, a lot of assistants, a lot of front office personnel, those sort of things have happened. And we stand here again today with very little movement in Green Bay. And let's go back to the end of the season. And or just the season as a whole, right? Everything felt a degree off last year. The expectations were not met on the team side as a whole. This is a team that was expecting maybe to compete in the Super Bowl conversation at minimum as a high-end playoff team, right? One of the best teams in the NFC. They go 8-9. They don't make the playoffs. This is a team that underachieved at literally every single position on the team. You can argue that the special teams outperformed expectations a little bit. I would give you that. But every position group underachieved, in my opinion. There's not a player that you can point to. You could point to maybe like a couple of the rookies, maybe a Zach Tom, a Christian Watson, that you could point to and say, you know what, they kind of exceeded my expectations a little bit. But players from 2022 to 2023, in my opinion, there is not a player that you can point to and be like, man, that player from 2021 to 2022 just made an incredible jump. I can't believe how good they got going from 2021 to 2022. There's not a player that you can point to and be like, wow, they got a lot better. And in the meantime, there are plenty of players, and I mean a lot of players that you can point to on the team. You know the names. I don't even have to give them to you because it's almost everyone that got worse from 2021 to 2022. That to me is concerning. We saw poor fundamentals, poor tackling, poor team defense, a defense that didn't seem bought in at all times to what Joe Barry was calling. We saw poor blocking, poor tackling. We saw poor innovation, poor creativity, awful red zone, awful efficiency. We didn't really see anything that would lend itself to believe that this is a well-run, sound team right now. And to be fair, it was 1 year. We saw 3 years of pretty impressive stuff from this Packers team until it came to the playoffs, which is kind of important. But 3 straight 13-win seasons is not easy to accomplish in the NFL in any capacity. And this is a team that had a lot of success during that time frame, struggled when they got into the playoffs. But overall, tough to put too much emphasis or too much negativity on those 3 years until last year when they are a below 500 team and failed to make the playoffs. So when I talked about at the end of the year how it was going to be difficult for there to be any sweeping major change, the reason I said that at the time was because who do you point to, right? Brian Gutekunst? It's tough to say, all right, everything was Brian's fault and you need a new general manager. I don't think there's anyone realistically, I know there's some fans, I'm sure, but I don't think there's anyone realistically that thought there was any real chance, nor should there have been, of Brian Gutekunst getting fired this past offseason. That just was never going to happen, and nor should it have. He had a really impressive run for the most part from taking over to Ted Thompson, going from a team that was struggling to 3 straight 13-win seasons. And really, in my opinion, built a roster in 2021 that was more than capable of winning the Super Bowl. Suffered some injuries. The Bakhtiari thing totally was a bummer. You got beat in Green Bay against San Francisco in a game where your special teams and your offense just did not show up to play at all. I thought that roster was good enough to win the Super Bowl. So it's really tough to pin this on Brian Gutekunst, even though there's plenty of blame to put on Brian. But to me, it's not the lion's share, and that's not the person that you're going to fire or move on from. Matt LaFleur, he's the guy that you brought in and won 3 straight 13-win seasons as soon as you hired him. He wasn't going to go anywhere, and even though there's plenty of blame on Matt LaFleur and some of the things that went on last year, and Aaron Jones disappearing at times, and the lack of efficiency on offense, and Aaron and Matt not always seeming on the same page, running almost 2 different offenses at times, there's plenty of things that you can point to. There was a 0.0% chance, probably less than that Matt LaFleur was going to go anywhere after one basically 500 level season, right? You don't go with 13 wins, then barely miss the playoffs by 1 game and be like, you're out, you're fired, right? So it wasn't going to be Matt LaFleur. Joe Barry seemed to be sort of the obvious one of maybe they move on from Joe Barry, but it's really hard when Matt LaFleur's already moved on from a variety of different coordinators in his tenure. And with Joe Barry, you can argue, like I said, that he was the one that really got the Packers to a position where they had a chance to make the playoffs at the end of the year. And Joe Barry could legitimately be like, you're going to fire me? My defense outperformed your offense. Why are you firing me? Even though there's plenty of blame to put on Joe Barry as well. How about Aaron Rodgers? And Aaron Rodgers still, there could be a change. We don't know what's going to happen with that. But same thing with Aaron, right? Did Aaron play up to his standard and up to the expectations that I think a lot of people had for him last year? No, not even close. Did injury play a part in that? Yes. Did some of the receiver issues, especially earlier in the year before Christian got in the game and at least consistently and had his breakout against Dallas, was some of that playing a part? Yes. Was just everything a degree off and you could see that Aaron was fighting through some stuff? Yes. But Aaron didn't play up to his expectations either. But Aaron can be like, bro, I just won the last 2 MVPs. This is clearly not my fault. You give me a couple weapons, I'm going to go out and win another MVP for you. Just protect me and give me weapons, and I'll do the rest from there. And he can make an argument that he didn't have everything that he needed in order to be super successful. So it's the Spider-Man meme, as I've talked about before. Aaron can point to Brian can point to Matt can point to Joe. Like, you could all point at somebody else and be like, yeah, that's not my fault. It's look at over there. Look at what they did wrong. And it's really tough to pin it on one person and say, like, that's the person that should get fired. And I'm also not fire and brimstone guy of like, you know what? We just got to fire people. That's going to fix everything. We just got to fire people and everything's going to be fixed. It doesn't always work that way. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it can help. But sometimes it can make you take a step back because you have to replace that person with somebody better too. And there were a lot of defensive coordinators out there. There were some different options of things that they could have done. But I'm not always just like, hey, firing is going to make everything better. Sometimes it feels good in the moment when somebody that didn't perform loses their job and you're excited about what's going to who can take their place. And again, I'm never celebrating anyone losing their job. Let me clarify that. But you can be excited about a replacement of somebody who maybe didn't perform as well, right? But a lot of times it doesn't always fix the solution. And sometimes like you're just that one step away. And we saw some growth from a Joe Barry defense at the end of last year that hopefully can carry over and perform better in 2023. I'm always the person that would, rather have it that Joe Barry just becomes a Hall of Fame level defensive coordinator next year. That'd be awesome. I don't care who it is. I just want whoever is in that position to perform at an insanely high level. And I'm hoping that's Joe Barry now because he's going to be back. But it all goes back to, and we can say the same thing about individual coaches, right? I can point to every single position group and be like, I thought all of them underperformed. All right, well, who do you want to fire? Do you want to fire all of them? Do you want to bring in all new position coaches? That may not be a great idea either. And it's really hard to pinpoint of like, all right, you know what? Jerry Montgomery, I just didn't like how he coached TJ Slayton last year. Who knows, right? Like maybe all of the defensive linemen were actually better because of Jerry Montgomery. And if any other defensive line coach had that group of defensive linemen, maybe they would have been 3 degrees worse. Who knows? Like it's really impossible to tell, right? But for a team that completely underachieved, for a team that did not live up to expectations, for a team that everything seemed a little bit off, for a team where every position group didn't perform up to what we expected them to have really no forced changes at this point of the offseason, it feels pretty underwhelming to just run everything back. And I know Matt LaFleur in his, after season press conference expected everyone back. And I think everyone was like, really? Because, usually a lot of times that's what coaches say. And then like a few days later, somebody's fired. It didn't happen. He said what he felt. He kept everyone on his staff. And the big one was obviously Jerry Gray, but Jerry Gray left on his own. Green Bay didn't fire or move on from Jerry Gray. Maybe it was mutual. We don't know. But Jerry Gray wanted to go somewhere else. And he did. He got an assistant head coaching job with Atlanta. So I think where I'm at right now is that everything, like I said, just didn't feel right. And yet here you are where no real major changes were made. And like I said, it's still early in the offseason. You've got the number 15 overall pick. You've got some solid draft capital. You have the whole Aaron Rodgers, Jordan Love decision yet to be made. You've got limited money to spend in free agency, but maybe they open up a couple different things and go out and get a major player. But a lot of the change that was possible was maybe going to be within this coaching staff and maybe, trying to do a few things differently. And we just haven't seen that so far. We haven't seen any voluntary changes on the coaching staff. Jerry Gray left of his own volition. The Titans, meanwhile, hired away Chad Brinker to be their assistant GM. So the Packers lost a key personnel person in their front office. And then Aubrey Pleasant just left for a coaching job with the Rams as their defensive backs coach and passing game coordinator. So they lose Jerry Gray, they lose Chad Brinker in the front office, and they lose Aubrey Pleasant as a offensive assistant to a defensive job with the Rams. They lose 3 key people. Meanwhile, the only person that you're getting in is Greg Williams, who, as I mentioned, is an interesting hire, and I'm intrigued to see what he can do. But you can't point to anything like at what the Cardinals cornerbacks have done over the last handful of seasons and be like, I'm really excited about that. Like, look what he did with, Byron Murphy. Like, he just turned Byron Murphy around and made him one of the best. It just never happened. They've had some really good corners. And I think, if anything, Cardinals corners probably played a bit below expectations. I'm not saying he's a bad coach. Who can grade that, right? Who can honestly say, like, yeah, Don't think Greg Williams is a good coach. Unless you worked with him or were at Cardinals practice every day watching him, it'd be tough to make that assessment. And I was neither of those things. So maybe he comes in and absolutely kills it. But on paper, on the surface, it's not one that I'm looking at and being like, yeah, that's going to change everything. Now Green Bay is going to be much better all the way around and everything's just going to improve. If that's your one move, so far, again, Jerry Gray gone, Chad Brinker in the front office gone, Aubrey Pleasant gone, and the only thing in is Greg Williams. That to me is a little bit underwhelming. Now, the other piece of the offseason, they did get the Aaron Jones restructure done, which we talked about. I think that's overall good business for Green Bay. Jones takes the pay cut and you restructure, you open up salary cap space, you keep one of the all-time good Green Bay Packers on your roster. That to me seems overall like a win. I discussed it in greater detail yesterday, where there is a little bit that you have to weigh out and be like, there's some good and bad that comes with it. Having Aaron Jones on your team is ultimately a good thing. But to me, this offseason so far has started out with a little bit of a dud. And I think the big thing that I'll say here, and I mentioned it's early. I mentioned I wasn't necessarily all gung-ho on just firing a bunch of people, but I did think change was made. I felt like if Green Bay wanted to keep Joe Barry, which I could semi-understand, even if not maybe the direction I would have gone in, I think I can understand the reasons that maybe they would have done so. And they wanted to keep their offense intact, and they wanted to keep their coaches intact, and they wanted to sort of run this back, and Matt LaFleur believed in his coaching staff, okay? If all of that was true, okay. But how can you get creative to find a way to maybe bring in a couple different minds into your organization just to maybe spice things up a little bit, just for a degree of change, just for something that is going to give fans the idea of, okay, they're not just resting on what they did a year ago. They know some major changes need to get made, and they're looking to bring in some new ideas. For example, Carolina Panthers recently hired former Lions head coach Jim Caldwell as a senior assistant. That is the type of move that I would have loved Green Bay to make. And maybe they still will. Maybe they'll still do something. Aubrey Pleasant is gone. They probably have some sort of consultant job that's open. But can you bring in some type of offensive consultant and defensive consultant, somebody that has a ton of respect in this league, somebody that you're probably going to have to pay for, but you are the Green Bay Packers. You have the money to do so. Go out and build the best staff that you possibly can. Can you go out and get some sort of assistant head coach or consultant or senior assistant or whatever it is that you want to call it? And you could call it a defensive strategist and an offensive strategist, whatever you want to do. But can you get creative and maybe get a couple additional really smart minds on each side of the ball? Because I trust Rich Bisaccia on the special team side. I think he's a really good coach, and I think what he has going is going in the right direction. He's got 2 assistants. I trust that. I like Matt LaFleur as head coach. I think keeping Adam Stenavich around because of his ability with the offensive line, and I think was just smart, but maybe not the greatest offensive coordinator, at least not what we saw in year 1 of him as offensive coordinator. And Joe Barry, maybe what they want to do and some of the things they saw at the end of the year, they want to be able to carry that over and not start from scratch. That's all fine and good. But can you infuse this offense and defense with a few additional ideas? Because it felt like Nathaniel Hackett was a pretty major loss on offense. And it feels like they do need some additional ideas and inspiration on defense. And not bringing in some sort of senior assistant or whatever it is that you want to call it, consultant, whatever. With all the great coaches that were available, like I said, you're probably going to have to get creative with it. And you're probably going to have to pay a decent amount of money to make that happen. I don't care. If you want to keep the staff as is, a staff that wasn't good enough a year ago, infuse it with some new ideas, infuse it with some new energy and intensity, bring in a couple additional, just minds, whatever title you want to give them, I don't care, but figure out a way to get that done. So as we sit here today, like I said, you've got Jerry Gray gone, you've got Chad Brinker gone, you've got Aubrey Pleasant gone, you've got Greg Williams in. That's it. Those are the only changes this offseason. And to me, as I said before, a team that's completely underachieved a season ago, that just doesn't feel good enough to me. There's a lot of offseason left. We'll see if maybe they bring in a couple of different assistants or consultants, whatever you want to call it. We'll see what they do in the draft. We'll see what they do in free agency, what they do with Aaron Rodgers. There are a lot of opportunities to make this team better, to make changes on this team. But as we sit here today on February 19th, it just feels to me like this offseason has started out as a bit of a dud, a bit underwhelming, and I would have liked to have seen just a little bit more of an injection of something different that felt needed on this team. We haven't seen it so far. A lot of offseason left. I'm hopeful. I'm optimistic. I really do think that they're going to make some potential major changes with this team moving forward. But I think the one thing that they really have to be careful of is just not running this back in like 90% the same with a couple draft picks added in. That to me seems like maybe one of the worst cases possible as they go into this 2023 year. That's going to do it for me today. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll be right back here tomorrow. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.